All right, so you've nailed the application process, and your resume is all set thanks to RoleCatcher's AI, and bam, you've scored an interview.
Big step that is. Congratulations. Time to really wow them now and show why you're the perfect fit for this conservator role.
For sure. And that's where this deep dive comes in handy.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack real conservator interview questions taken straight from RoleCatcher's database. And our expert is here to walk you through not just the what to say, but the how to say it to really make that lasting impression.
We're going to cover those common ones like why this career, but also dive into some tougher questions to get you thinking on your feet.
And just so everyone's on the same page, we're pulling all this awesome info from RoleCatcher's career guides and their massive stash of interview questions. They've even got this AI that scores your resume and gives feedback tailored to the job you're applying for.
Total game changer, especially in a competitive field like conservation.
No doubt. But before we get lost in questions, let's paint a quick picture of what being a conservator is actually like day to day.
Because it's more than just dusting off old paintings,
Yeah.
as the RoleCatcher Career Guide points out.
Totally. So break it down for us. What's a day in the life of a conservator really look like?
Think of it like being a guardian of history. They're the ones responsible for preserving and restoring a whole range of objects with cultural or historical significance. Paintings and sculptures for sure, but also books, textiles, even buildings.
Sounds like a mix of detective scientist and artist all in one.
Spot on. You need to have this deep understanding of the materials, the history of the object, and the techniques to keep it safe for future generations.
Whoa, that's got to be both super challenging and incredibly rewarding.
Definitely is. And speaking of challenges, let's jump into some of those interview questions and how to handle them with confidence.
Love it. First one's a classic. What inspired you to pursue a career in conservation?
This is where you let that passion shine. They want to know what makes you tick, what sparked that interest in this field. Think back to that moment. Was it a museum visit as a kid? A book you read? A fascination with a specific time period or culture?
So it's not just listing qualifications, it's sharing your story, your personal connection.
You got it. And be ready for follow-ups like, what areas of conservation are you most into? Or what are some of your favorite museums or cultural institutions?
They want to see that you're not just looking for any job, you're drawn to conservation specifically.
Exactly. And remember, RoleCatcher's AI can help you tailor your answers to the specific organization and role. If they're focused on a certain type of conservation, make sure to highlight your experience or interest in that area.
It's like having a cheat sheet personalized just for you.
Hmm.
Okay, next up. How do you stay up to date on the latest conservation techniques and practices?
This is all about showing you're a lifelong learner, always striving to improve your skills and knowledge.
Crucial in a field like conservation, with new discoveries and technologies popping up all the time.
Absolutely. Have some specific examples ready to share. Professional journals, you read conferences, you've attended workshops, you've taken even online courses or webinars.
So it's not just saying you keep up, it's showing them how you do it.
Precisely. And that's where RoleCatcher's career guides can be super useful. They're packed with info on professional development resources and organizations related to conservation.
Okay, let's dive into a question that really tests your problem-solving skills. How do you prioritize conservation efforts when faced with limited resources?
This one's a tough cookie, but a great chance to showcase your strategic thinking and decision-making under pressure. They want to see that you can assess needs, evaluate risks, and come up with a plan that balances preservation with practicality.
So it's not about saving every single object, it's about knowing which ones are the most critical and why.
Right. Think about a specific example from your own experience. Maybe you had to make tough choices on which objects to treat first or manage a tight budget.
And be prepared to back up those decisions. What were your criteria?
Exactly. And it's totally fine to acknowledge the challenges and compromises that are sometimes necessary in this field.
Makes sense. You're not expected to have all the answers, but you do need to show a thoughtful and strategic approach.
100%. Now onto a question all about communication and diplomacy. Can you describe a time when you had to mediate a conflict between stakeholders in a conservation project?
Ooh, this one sounds tricky. Conservation often involves working with lots of different folks, museum curators, collectors, community members who might have different ideas about the right way to do things.
Exactly. This question is testing your ability to navigate those differences. Listen to everyone's concerns and find solutions that respect all sides.
So what kind of examples should you share here?
Think of a situation where you had to bring people together, find some common ground, and reach a compromise everyone could get behind. Maybe it was a disagreement over how to display an object or a debate about the best way to restore something.
And be ready to talk about the steps you took to resolve the conflict. How did you communicate with each person? What strategies did you use to build consensus?
Exactly. And don't be shy about highlighting your soft skills, your ability to listen, to empathize, to negotiate, and to find creative solutions. These are all super important for a successful conservator.
Okay, let's move on to a question that's all about measuring your success. How do you measure the success of a conservation project?
This one seems simple, but it's a great opportunity to show you understand the bigger impact of your work.
So it's not just checking off boxes, but considering the long-term effects of your work.
Exactly. Think about both tangible and intangible outcomes. Did the project meet its conservation goals? Did it contribute to research or education? Did it raise awareness about cultural heritage? Did it help people connect with their history?
It's about seeing the big picture and how conservation fits into the wider world.
Right, and this is where RoleCatcher's AI comes in clutch again. It can analyze the organization's mission and values, suggesting ways to tailor your answers. For example, if they're big on community engagement, you might highlight how your project involved working with local groups or schools.
All about showing you get what matters to them. Okay, one last question before we wrap this part of our deep dive. How do you ensure that conservation projects are sustainable in the long term?
This one really gets to the heart of responsible conservation. It's not just about fixing something and calling it a day. You got to think about how to ensure its preservation for years to come.
So thinking beyond the immediate project and considering the long-term needs.
Exactly. Think about things like training others on proper care, developing a plan for maintenance, and monitoring securing funding for future efforts.
It's about building a legacy that lasts beyond your own involvement.
Right. And this is where your passion for conservation really comes into play. If you truly care about these objects and their stories, you'll be dedicated to their long-term survival. And this whole sustainability thing ties back to something we touched on earlier about those different places conservators work.
You mean like museums, historical sites, private collections, that kind of thing?
Exactly. Each environment brings its own twist when it comes to long-term preservation. A museum might worry about things like climate control and visitors' impact, while a private collector might need guidance on proper storage and handling.
So understanding the context of where these objects live is key for sustainable strategies.
For sure. And speaking of context, let's shift gears a bit and look at a question that digs into your technical expertise. How do you manage risk in conservation projects?
Ooh, that one sounds like it requires some serious knowledge.
It does. They want to see your ability to spot potential threats to those objects and proactively come up with ways to minimize those risks.
So it's not just about knowing how to fix things. It's about predicting problems before they even happen.
Exactly. Think about all the different types of risks. Environmental factors like light, humidity, temperature swings. Then you've got human-induced risks like accidental damage during handling or improper storage.
And I bet there are even risks tied to the conservation treatments themselves, right?
You nailed it. Certain cleaning methods or stabilization techniques, if not done just right, could actually cause more damage or change the object's original materials.
Whoa, there's a lot to think about. So how can someone show off their risk management skills in an interview?
We'll start by describing your approach to risk assessment. Do you use any specific methods or tools? Have you created protocols for handling and moving delicate objects?
It's all about showing you've got a system to identify, evaluate, and mitigate those risks.
And don't forget to give concrete examples. Have you used preventative measures like protective cases or monitoring systems, trained others on proper handling?
Sharing those real-world experiences will really hammer home your expertise in risk management.
Now let's tackle a question that can throw people off. Can you describe a time when you had to make a difficult decision in a conservation project?
This one sounds intense. I'm guessing it's not about picking between two different types of glue.
Definitely not. The interviewer wants to see your judgment, your problem solving, and your ability to make tough calls when there's no easy answer.
So they're looking for someone who can weigh all the factors before making a move.
Exactly. And remember, there's not always a right or wrong answer here. It's about explaining your thought process, how you got to that decision.
Okay, I'm getting nervous just thinking about it. Any tips on how to tackle this one?
Think back to a situation where you faced a real dilemma. Maybe conflicting priorities, limited resources, or ethical considerations.
Like having to prioritize one artifact over another because of budget issues.
Perfect example. Walk them through your thinking. How did you weigh the options? What factors did you focus on? And what was the end result?
So it's about showing you can make those tough calls while staying true to conservation principles.
Now let's talk about teamwork and collaboration. How do you build partnerships with other organizations and stakeholders in conservation projects?
This makes a lot of sense. Conservation is rarely a solo act, right? You often need to work with other institution specialists, even folks from the community.
Absolutely. They want to see if you can build relationships, communicate well, and work towards a common goal with a bunch of different people.
So showcasing those people's skills, essential for good collaboration.
You got it. Think about past projects where you had to reach out for expertise, resources, or support. Did you work with scientists to analyze materials? Partner with educators to create outreach programs? Consult with local communities to understand the cultural significance of an object?
Sharing those experiences will really show you can handle those complex collaborative projects.
And highlight the value of those partnerships. How did they contribute to the project's success? What did you learn from working with others?
Okay, let's wrap up this section with a question that really emphasizes cultural sensitivity. How do you integrate cultural considerations into conservation projects?
This one's huge. It shows that you understand that conservation isn't just about the object itself, but respecting its cultural meaning and the communities it represents.
So recognizing those stories, beliefs, and values connected to the objects you're working to preserve.
Exactly. Think of times when you had to factor in cultural perspectives in your decisions. Maybe you talked with indigenous communities about traditional care practices, or changed your treatment approach to honor an object's spiritual significance.
Sharing those examples shows your commitment to ethical and culturally sensitive work.
And remember, RoleCatcher's AI can help tailor your answers to the organization's values. If they're big on diversity and inclusion, you'll want to highlight your experience with diverse communities and your grasp of cultural heritage.
It's all about showing you're not just skilled, but also thoughtful and culturally aware of the impact of your work.
Now, before we move on to our final thoughts, let's circle back to the RoleCatcher Career Guide for some insights into the daily grind of being a conservator. We've talked about passion skills, the interview. What about the work environment itself?
That's a great point. The guide mentions that conservators can work all over the place, from museums and galleries to libraries and historic sites, even private collections.
And each setting comes with its own quirks and perks. Working in a museum might involve a lot of interaction with the public, and teaching them about conservation while working in a private collection might need a more specialized skill set focused on a specific type of artifact.
And the guide also mentions that the work can be pretty demanding physically. Long hours on your feet handling delicate things, maybe even working in dusty or tricky environments.
That's why it's so important to be aware of the physical demands and be ready to talk about how you'd handle those challenges. Maybe you've got experience with specific lifting techniques or you're comfortable in tight spaces. Be prepared to share examples that show you can handle the physical side of the job.
And let's not forget the emotional side of things. The guide mentions that working with fragile or damaged objects, especially those with historical or cultural weight, can be tough emotionally.
It's true. You might be working on pieces that have been around for centuries, and that can be pretty heavy. It's important to be aware of your own feelings and to find ways to cope with the potential stress of the job.
And that might be something worth mentioning in the interview. Showing that you're self-aware and have thought about the emotional demands can demonstrate maturity and professionalism.
Absolutely, and it circles back to that passion we talked about. If you genuinely care about these objects, that passion can carry you through tough spots.
So we've talked about the why of conservation, the skills needed, and what the work itself is like. But what about the what's next? Where can a career in conservation lead?
That's where the guides section on advancement paths comes in. It outlines how you can climb the ladder, maybe taking on more responsibility leading teams or specializing in a particular area.
And it also highlights the importance of always learning. Even experienced conservators need to stay up to date on new techniques, technologies, and research.
Right. The guide suggests things like going for advanced degrees, going to conferences, joining professional groups to stay at the cutting edge.
And they mention something really cool, building a portfolio. It's not just your resume and interview skills, it's having actual proof of your work.
For sure. A portfolio showing your conservation projects, your restoration work, even articles or presentations you've done can be super valuable, especially as you move up.
It's like a visual representation of your skills and experience something that can really make you stand out.
And don't forget about networking. The guide suggests joining organizations like the International Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works or the American Institute for Conservation.
Those organizations are great for connecting with other professionals, learning from experts, and even finding mentors.
And speaking of mentors, RoleCatcher's Career Guide also gives examples of conservators at different stages in their careers, from entry-level to senior positions.
These profiles give a peek into the typical responsibilities and experiences at each level, sort of a glimpse into what your future could look like.
And they provide real examples of how conservators have used their skills and navigated their careers, which can be pretty inspiring when you're starting out.
It's like having a roadmap for your career with signs along the way to help you reach your goals. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's get back to interview prep and make sure you're ready to knock it out of the park.
Back to those interview questions, you mean?
You bet. We've covered some big ones, but there are a few more worth talking about.
All right, hit me.
Okay, this one seems pretty basic. What are your salary expectations? But something tells me it's trickier than it sounds.
You're right on the money. This question can make people nervous, but it's all about confidence and preparation.
So how do you strike that balance between knowing your worth and not scaring them off with a high number?
RoleCatcher can actually help with this. Their salary data tool can give you an idea of the typical range for conservators in your area and with your experience level.
Super helpful. So you can walk into that interview with real data to back you up, which can make you feel way more confident when it's time to negotiate.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about the number itself. It's about being able to explain your value and how your skills and experience match the job's responsibilities.
Right. It's about showing that you get the value you bring to the table, not just looking for a paycheck.
Speaking of value, here's a question that often pops up near the end of an interview. Do you have any questions for us?
This isn't just a formality, is it?
Definitely not. This is your chance to show you've done your homework, that you're genuinely interested in the role and the organization, and that you're thinking critically about how you'd fit in.
So what kinds of questions should you ask?
Think about things that will help you understand the day-to-day work, the culture of the place, and the opportunities for growth.
Maybe something like, what are some of the biggest challenges facing the conservation department? Or what kinds of professional development opportunities are there?
Those are great. And remember, the questions you ask can also help you decide if this is the right place for you. It's a two-way street, and the interview is your chance to get info as well as give it.
So we've covered a ton here, from understanding the conservator role to acing those interview questions. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned, RoleCatcher's Copilot AI subscription.
Ah, yes. For those who want to take their prep up a notch, Copilot AI offers even more personalized support.
Tell me more.
Well, on top of the AI resume builder and video practice we talked about, Copilot AI also gives tailored feedback on your answers to specific interview questions.
So it's like having a personal coach analyzing your responses and suggesting ways to improve.
You got it. It can help you find areas to strengthen your answers, give tips on using relevant keywords, and even offer examples of successful responses from other conservators.
Like having a secret weapon.
It really is, and it can give you that extra confidence knowing you've prepped like a pro and your answers are as strong as they can be.
I love it. So for anyone listening who wants to take their conservator job search to the next level, RoleCatcher is definitely worth a look.
Totally. It's a game changer for anyone trying to navigate the world of conservation careers.
Okay, before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, I want to acknowledge that interview prep can be a lot of work.
It's no walk in the park.
But you've got this. You're passionate about conservation, you have the skills and experience, and now you've got the tools and knowledge to nail that interview.
You said it. And don't forget, RoleCatcher is there every step of the way.
Okay, so we've talked about what it takes to be a conservator, how to rock that interview, but before we wrap up, I want to touch on something the career guide stresses. The importance of always learning in this field.
Can't emphasize that enough. Conservation is always changing. New technologies, research, ethical considerations are constantly popping up. Staying curious and committed to learning is key.
Totally. The guide suggests a bunch of ways to stay ahead. Conferences, workshops, professional organizations, all great options.
And don't underestimate hands-on experience. Volunteering at museums, assisting seasoned conservators, even taking on personal projects can be super valuable for learning.
Like that saying, learn by doing right.
Exactly. Now, I know we've thrown a lot at you today, but remember, RoleCatcher has got you covered.
Yes. Their AI platform can help you build a killer resume practice interview, answers even research salaries.
It's like having a career coach right in your pocket.
Love it. And before we sign off, let's leave everyone with a thought. Imagine yourself a few years down the road, you've landed that dream conservator job. What kind of impact do you want to make? What legacy will you leave on these objects and the stories they tell?
Powerful question. It's bigger than just the job. It's about the passion and dedication you bring to this work.
Exactly. You're not just preserving objects, you're preserving history, culture, art for generations to come.
So when you walk into that interview room, remember the big picture.
Yeah.
Let that passion shine and show them why you're the one for the job.
And don't forget, sign up for a free RoleCatcher account to check out all the resources we talked about.
You've got the knowledge, the drive, and the tools. Go get them. We're rooting for you.
Okay, so we've covered a ton about what it takes to be a conservator and how to rock that interview. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something. The career guide really emphasizes the importance of always learning and growing in this field.
Couldn't agree more. Conservation never stands still. New technologies, new research, even the way we think about ethics, it's all constantly evolving. So staying curious and committed to learning is key.
Absolutely. The guide suggests a bunch of ways to stay ahead of the curve: conferences, workshops, joining professional organizations, all fantastic options.
And don't discount hands-on experience either. Volunteering at museums, working alongside seasoned conservators, even tackling personal projects can give you incredible insights and practical skills.
Like that saying, learn by doing right.
Exactly. Now, I know we've thrown a ton of info your way today, but remember, RoleCatcher's got your back.
They do. Their AI platform can help you build a standout resume practice interview, answers even research salary expectations.
Like having a career coach in your pocket.
Love it. And before we sign off, let's leave everyone with a thought. Imagine yourself a few years down the road, you landed that dream conservator job. What kind of impact do you want to make? What legacy will you leave on these objects and the stories they hold?
That's a powerful thought. Goes beyond just getting the job. It's about the passion and dedication you bring to this work.
Exactly. You're not just preserving objects, you're preserving history, culture, art for generations to come.
So walk into that interview room with the big picture in mind. Let your passion shine and show them why you're the perfect fit for this important work.
And don't forget, sign up for a free RoleCatcher account to access all those awesome resources we've talked about.
You've got the knowledge, the drive, and the tools. Now go out there and crush that interview. We're cheering you on.